Okay, so I'm a junior dev, and let me tell you, trying to read some old code bases feels like trying to read hieroglyphics. It's a mess. But I've been learning that getting good at documentation isn't just for the senior devs. It actually makes my life a lot easier, and it can make your life a lot easier as well. So this video is all about how documenting your code as a junior, as a senior, or anyone who's working as a developer can make my life easier, and it can make your life a lot easier, and can turn those messy projects into something that actually has a reason behind it, not just what the code is, but why the code exists in the first place. Hi, I'm Nayab, and on this channel we talk about all things career and engineering related. I'm a software engineer myself, and I share all my tips on how to make your life easier and thrive in corporate. So first, let's talk about why your code actually needs a story. And I think every developer has had it, whether you're a junior or not, where you'll be looking at a bunch of code and you'll think, what on earth even is this? And sometimes I've been up reading code till 11 p.m. and I do not want anyone else to be in that position. But what happens when you don't have documentation and you just have a bunch of code is that code becomes jumbo, which no one can understand, especially if your developer that wrote it is no longer in the business. No one can explain to you what's going on there. It leads to hidden tech debt. I don't like using that term, but that is quite literally what it is. It's just a bunch of code which will keep building up and will keep being built upon and still exists in the code base. But documentation has obviously changed a lot with AI entering the scene. Now juniors can look at it in a different way. It's not just a bunch of readmes and dead docs in Google or Confluence. It's actually the future proofing of an organization is how I think about it. Documentation exists in many forms now in 2026. It exists as readmes that are really intuitive naming for your methods, clear architecture diagrams, and in code doc strings as well. All of these things make it really easy to decipher the code that's been written and actually give a reason for why it exists. If I call a function get customer name, everyone will know what it does without even having to go and check for it. But if it's something like retrieve first string document XXX, no one knows what that is. So we need to be mindful of these practices when coding as well, but let's talk about that ahead. And the final reason why we actually need documentation is to prevent the cost of just getting it done. And I'm a victim of this too. I just love to get tasks done and be done and over with them. But this actually has a lot of hidden costs, and especially with onboarding new juniors, it can be such a headache of just moving on with tasks because the company is saying you need to. But if you can just spend 5 minutes being thoughtful about the code, it saves a lot of time in the future for having to come back to it, having to explain it to juniors, or having to explain it to newly onboarded staff, and it prevents small change from being risky in the future. As with every video, let's keep it simple. The first benefit of you having documentation in your organization. We all know documentation helps your future self. That's a clear benefit, but it also promotes collaboration, and it helps you, the devs, the product managers, the business analysts, all of you people work together in an organization and activate the powers of collaboration. When everyone actually understands the meaning behind the architecture and how clean it is, how well maintained it is, the decisions get made faster. There's fewer misunderstandings on why something is done and what was done as well, and this context is provided with the documentation. If you have a really good README, the code reviews get easier as well. If someone is coming to review your code, they can understand why you've put it in there, in what context you've put it in, and if the documentation is simple and you've clearly named things easily, they can understand the intention behind the code and not just the code itself. And if you're anyone who's working in an agile environment and it's a microservice heavy architecture, this is what will help you the most. Having seamless documentation that's going from one system to another is what has saved me time and time again, because it's difficult to be jumping between repositories and having to talk to product managers and outside service providers, and the documentation is what held me together as a junior. It provides seamless interaction between systems and between teams. Documentation future-proofs your systems, and I'm sure you know it and I'm sure you've heard it as well, but let's talk about it anyway. Good documentation reduces technical debt, and it actually helps you and your teammates not have to keep going back and refactor code and talk about it over and over again. It saves so much time in onboarding and when new teammates join as well. And I'm sure we've heard of tribal knowledge, and if one person knows everything in the system, which there's always one person in the organization, I have one person who popped in my head when I was writing this, and this one person knowing it is a threat to the system, because if they're on holiday, if they're off, that project can't go forward without their input. And this is where documentation really comes into play. If you're someone who's created a system of that sort, which is dependent on your interaction with it, and for anything to be merged into it and to succeed, then you need to create documentation so that other engineers can take it on without your input on it. You're just first of all decreasing your own workload, and also you're future-proofing that project. It can keep running and your hard work can be carried forward. And I've said it multiple times, but documentation reduces your onboarding time. And if you think of it from a larger scale, you might just be a junior who's onboarded on, And you might think, I can't believe there was nothing to do and I was just struggling through repositories back to back to back. That's the typical experience. But you can change that experience for someone else. And that was my intention after I joined. And I had a lot of downtime as a junior because I was doing the easier projects and just trying to learn and get up to speed. But as soon as I was learning the repositories and as I was learning them, I tried to create simple basic documentation to understand what each repository was doing, where it's used, where it's referenced, and its main purpose in the organization. And I remember one of my colleagues who joined after me, he was like, thank goodness you've shared your notes with me. It saved me so much time, and you just make life easier for someone else who comes. And not to mention, if you're a senior who's watching this, think about the time it takes to ramp up those engineers and get them up to speed and shipping out their best products. You decrease this time significantly by having good documentation in, and it future-proofs the organization as well. Any new engineer can join, get onboarded fast, do their tasks and get on with their work. No one likes being stuck in a black hole of code which doesn't even have a meaning behind it. It wouldn't be a video of mine if there was no practical takeaways, so let's talk about what you can actually do to implement good documentation. The first things and the most simple things is to implement readmes on every single repositories, and it's very easy recently as well. With newer projects, get Claude to write your readmes. That is the best experience I've had. Claude Opus does a great job at it as well, and Claude Sonnet as well. Well, I have only used that for one repository, but I would really recommend having some AI based ones which AI can interpret as well, but make sure you double check them and look over them as well. Also, what you can add is markdown, doc types, and UML diagrams, which are really simple. The UML diagrams I write for myself, but they have been really helpful in cases of explaining data flow and how data is flowing throughout the organization. And if you want documentation that stays alive, use Swagger, use OpenAPI, and for your personal documentation, I haven't seen it implemented in an organization wide, but Notion does a great job at keeping it alive as well. So I would definitely recommend checking those out for documentation which has been kept alive and updated constantly. You don't need 200-page manuals, and this is something which I always try to tell everyone, like, your documentation doesn't have to be super in-depth because code changes so rapidly you can't keep up with it. But instead, if it's really simple, straightforward, and covering the fundamentals which someone else can come and take away, that's what keeps documentation alive and keeps it going. And something which I've started doing recently off my own accord, this isn't implemented organization-wide, but I try to do it for my repositories that I'm sort of having a bit of ownership of, is implement the documentation into your CI/CD pipeline. There's quite a few commands out there that you can auto-generate code with using new AI models, and I would definitely recommend this for any junior or any senior at all. Try getting some basic documentation in. Do double check it 100%. Don't rely on AI to do your documentation for you, but if you know what code you've written and what should be happening in the repository, by all means put it in as part of your pipeline and review it and let it happen automatically so something exists at all points and you know what's going in and out of the code base. What I'd also like to mention is that the best documentation is having your code clearly written. And this is an undervalued thing, especially because developers are so smart, they tend to over-engineer a lot of things. That's what I've noticed in my experience, but having clean code is documentation in itself. There's such a high return on investment of readability of code. So let's just talk about that briefly. Clean code is non-negotiable because it leads to faster debugging. If you're on this channel, you know I hate debugging and I will continue hating it for the rest of my life until I get good at it. Clean code means fewer mistakes, quicker fixes, and better stability of the code. It just lasts longer and it goes in the long term. And I'm someone who tries to keep it as simple as possible. I don't like to overcomplicate problems or the solutions. So I do the bare minimum possible in terms of code lines. I want the least amount of code to do the most amount of work possible. So I try to keep it as clean and simple as possible so anyone who comes in can understand it. And this might be counterintuitive because we want to be smart as developers, but this is what really helps. You're saving people time, you're making the organization faster. If people don't have to sit and decode what you've written for like 3 hours of their day, and they can just simply come in, read the code, know what it's doing, know where it's being used and what its implementations are. The engineers can then focus on actually solving the problems and having creative solutions. I think that leads to a lot of innovation in the organization. And there's nothing I love more than engineers doing what they do best, solving problems creatively and coming up with their own solutions. And I try to enable that, especially for the seniors as well. It leads them to being more creative with the problems, and I absolutely love it because it leads to newer features which you wouldn't have thought of. I wouldn't have personally thought of. So I do my best as like someone who's earlier on in their career, not so much a junior anymore, a more mid-level engineer, but I try to make life easier for others who are coming in and keep it running smoothly. Documentation isn't just a nice to have, it's something essential going forward. When we're implementing so much AI code into our systems, we need to know what goes in and out, and I'm all for using AI and having a good impact on organizations as a result of it. We all need to implement it. Senior developers, junior developers, anyone who's in the organization, whether you're technical or non-technical, make your own documentation, and I'm going to make a video on how to document for your own learning as well. Let me know if you guys want to see that. But more than anything, documentation allows you to tell a clear story with your code, why it was actually written in the first place, not just what was written. And I'm all for putting a story behind the code and giving the context, because context helps the team move with confidence. They can actually know what's going on, what they're working on, what the impact it's having. So next time you write code, don't just think about making it work, think about why you're implementing it, how it can be used in the wider context of the organization, and what effects it can have for juniors and seniors who are going to come back and use it. And try implementing simple documentation. Very skeleton documentation that does the bare minimum but serves its purpose. It can tell anyone what your future self, your teammates, and anyone who's new that's been onboarded will thank you. If you want stronger teams and a better workplace, start documenting today.